There I was, standing in the church with my so-called friends, pointing knives at me. But I guess I should just start from the beginning. Back in elementary school, I had amazing friends who loved me for who I am. I had these friends up until I was 13. That's when everything changed. When I was 13, I started talking to the wrong people. People who, even though they were 13, were getting into drugs. I didn't respect my old group of friends anymore. I started to bully other people. The leader of my new group was called Frank. He was rude and selfish and sadistic. He also was sad and alone. I was turning into Frank, and I basically was just like him. I threw people into dumpsters outside of our school and even pushed them out onto the roads. When I was 15 years old, my parents got a call from the school. The school told them that I was getting into drugs and bullying other students. That night when I came home was probably the worst of my life. I was angry at my parents for yelling at me. I felt that I didn't do anything wrong and that my parents were just being idiots. That night I snuck out of my house and I went to Frank's. When I arrived at Frank's house, Frank was watching a movie, and when he saw me standing outside in the freezing cold snow, he invited me in. When I was in his house, I started to complain about how stupid my parents were being. Luckily, Frank agreed with me and said, "Yeah, that's why I killed mine." It took me a minute to realize what he just said, but when I did, I wanted nothing to do with Frank. I tried telling Frank that I was going home, but he insisted on me staying.
"It'll be fine, Sophie,"
he tried telling me. I was freaking out. When Frank had his back turned to get us some drinks, I dashed up his stairs and went to his bathroom and locked it. I was sitting back to the door and trying to figure out a way to escape when I realized I could go out his window, and so I did. It took me a full hour to get home, and the next morning my parents had no idea that I sneaked out. But I'm sure if they did, they would just ground me for life. When I went to school, Frank and the group were sitting by the lockers. "So why did you leave last night? We were having fun," Frank said to me with a smirk. I didn't answer right away, but when I did, I blurted out, "Because you killed your parents!" The group backed away from Frank. The whole school was staring at us in horror. Frank looked at me as if he was going to kill me. Frank didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. When I got home, I told my parents everything. I started to cry, and honestly, I thought my parents would yell at me, but instead, they hugged me and told me it was going to be all right. A year went by, and I managed to rebuild the relationship with my old friends and family. It was a church day, and we were at church. I was there with my friends and family when all of a sudden the doors flew wide open, and Frank and the group were standing there with guns and knives. The whole church was backed into a corner. Then Frank grabbed my mother and just stabbed her. Then he stabbed my father and all of my friends. I was so scared and streaming with tears. Then Frank grabbed me and said, "Just so you know, I burned your little house down." Frank was about to shoot me when the police came bursting in and arrested Frank and the group. Sure enough, Frank wasn't lying. He did burn my house down, and the saddest part of it all was my parents and friends were all dead. Since I was 16, I couldn't live by myself, so I was adopted by a loving family. It's been 3 years now, and I still miss my parents and friends, but I'm just glad that Frank and the group are locked away.